Good morning, dearest friends. Today is Tuesday. It is the 16th of Shvat. It is the 18th of January. So I guess we have Chai January. Yesterday was Tu B'Shvat. Today we are gathered once again to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechah Shabbos, 11th chapter, Tzadik Ches Amud Beis, soon to be on Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph. We've been talking about the tabernacle, the Mishkan. It is actually Hashgacha Pratis because this week is Parshas Yisroi, Mishpatim, and then when we get into Truma and Tetzaveh, which is in just 3 weeks or 2 weeks and a fraction from now, we'll be very familiar and we'll have a head start on everyone else that's exploring the instructions for the Mishkan with our studies here. And again, our studies are going to be primarily focused on the Krushim and the Uriot, the material that covers the Mishkan. We're still in the Krushim space. Prior to that, we spoke of the wagons. And this, of course, all is, on one hand, very not connected to Shabbos, but ultimately very Shabbosdik, very much associated with Shabbos, because much or all of the malachas that we discuss are based on practices and realities that existed in the Mishkan. And so this is supremely relevant to the broad Shabbos discussion. And as Jews, and a discussion to understand what the Torah is talking about is always relevant and valuable. So a few days ago, we were talking about the wagons and the way the Krushim were aligned. We probed the Rav's statements about the desert not having the public domain of the desert, not having any roofing. We challenged that with some statements about the wagons and the way the Krushim were laid onto the wagons, and that was the discussion thus far. Yesterday, we pivoted to the talk about the nature of the Krushim themselves and the way they were snapped together and part of the Mishkan. We know that they were, and we're not done. We're going to talk more about the Adonim, the brackets, the sockets, and how they plugged in. But yesterday we reviewed two different perspectives, two different opinions on how the Krushim themselves were shaped. Were they sloped, or did they have the exact same dimensions, width and depth as on the bottom as on the top? And that had relevance to the way they were structured on the Mishkan. I'm going to share my screen now. And all right. I'm sharing my screen. Here, gentlemen, you want to close the door? Alon, you want to just help me close the door? So we have another Gemara being shared in Safaria. Hang on one second. Hey, guys, let me just close. Not that the door is soundproof, but we'll take what we can get. But before we do that, there's a website called the Aldaf, or actually not Aldaf. There's a website called, there's an organization called the Orthodox Union, OU, and they have invested a lot in the Daf HaYomi project, encourage Daf HaYomi and to curate different shiurim. And actually this shiur, for those that remember, we are, I think, right now in our 2-year anniversary, just about, of the shiur, because it was just before Yeshiva Week 2 years ago, which was approximately when Daf Yomi started its new cycle, that we started a Gemarsh. I'm sorry?
You started the in-person once a week.
I'm talking about the in-person one initially, which was right around January.
Monday morning, once a week, I think it was initially.
Right, it was January 2020, correct? Or 2021?
It was definitely 2020, yeah.
No, was it 2020 or 2021?
2020.
Yeah, 2020. January 2020.
Came along, we switched to Zoom, and then we started doing it every day.
So originally, after Daf HaYomi started, we started a weekly shiur. It was January 2020. And then with the arrival of COVID, we turned this into a daily Zoom shiur, which we are, Baruch Hashem, to this day. With Hashem's help, the intention, at least my intention, is to keep this going as such. Perhaps if the circumstances and conditions allow, we can eventually pivot this to a hybrid shiur, but that's a discussion for another time. For now, what I wanted to share with you is that I was looking, as I promised you yesterday, for some images to help us visualize. We shared images from the pictures from the Art Scroll and from the Steinsaltz, but I found an even better resource for the moment. And so please bear with me. This is a PDF created for this Gemara, and this is actually the wrong PDF, so bear with me another moment. Hold on, is this it? Yeah, here we go. Don't get dizzy. Here we go. So here is, in case we had trouble visualizing it before. Let me see if I can zoom. No, we're already pretty zoomed in. I just want to. No. All right, I don't know how to pivot it. Anyways, here we go. So yesterday we were talking about the two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, if it was identical from top to bottom, or it was sloped. And so here we can see that it's not very different than the picture we saw yesterday, but we can visualize it in the context of the Mishkan. And the question that was asked, which I think is also depicted. I thought it was depicted here. Hang on. No. Where was it depicted? Well, anyways, here you could visualize that. I found another PDF, which maybe there they did a better job depicting this issue. Oh, here. Okay, this is the one I want to show you. This is another PDF that I found. So here you see the solution. The solution was that it needed to be sloped on both sides. It needed to be triangular as opposed to just
for it does not have a gap, it needs to be straight on one side.
It basically needs to be designed, it needs to have a custom. Oh, here. If they were not aligned, so then you'd have this awkward dynamic where this protrudes upwards because of the sloping nature. And so the Gemara answers that it would have to be sloped on two sides, on both exposed angles, so that it is flush. Again, if you weren't here yesterday, just pardon me for a moment. Just so you can see here, this one, it's triangular, it's sloped on both sides, and so it plugs in beautifully.
That one is straight. That's the right triangle on that one. The one on the left is the right triangle.
The left side is the answer. The right side was the initial.
Straight on one side and angled on the other.
That is on the right side, and that's the problematic one. That's
the other way.
No, one on the right is the problem. On the left is the solution, because on the right, it's only shaved, it's only sloping on the exterior and not on the side facing us. And therefore it protrudes right over there. You see that?
Yes, because
whereas if you shave it on both sides, so it has more of a triangular, I don't know the right words. Who are our mathematicians over here? You're probably getting very frustrated at me.
One on the left is a right triangle, so it's perpendicular.
It's not just on the right, it's on both sides. It's on both.
Yeah. Well, the one on the
slopes here, and it also slopes over here. And so it's flush, it blocks in the corner. A triangle is the best word that I could use. Again, those that are, anyway, so that's the picture. Again, I think our imagination could do it, but to see a picture is good. And also, if you're wondering what these rings are, I think this is a little bit, they curated on a computer, so it's a little rudimentary, but essentially this is where the brichim, the posts that secured it on the outside, were aligned, and then this hole over here is for the Bria Chatichon, the one that runs on the inside. And then we'll refer back to this image when we discuss the Yeriot, the materials of the Mishkan, but we're not there yet. And no, this is the wrong one again. Sorry. Here, or we can look at these pictures. Anyways. So the good news is I think we found a good resource that we can call up on occasion. Now let's start. Actually, no, before we start that, I want to show you one more thing. Here is the pasuk. Remember yesterday we read that the Bria Chatichon existed in a miraculous manner because it was threaded in a U shape from the south side of the Mishkan, which is a long wall, up the western wall, which was the narrower wall, only 6 or 8 krashim, and then it threaded up the north side. And we understood that for a single beam to snake around, that is absolutely miraculous. There was no such technology, certainly in those days, for something to be able to thread itself
Why
around.
why do we have to say that it's snaked around? Why, if it says mavriach min hakatzeh lakazeh, why don't we just say from one end to the other end on the north side, one end to the other end on the east side, whatever?
So
Why
you're
do we have to go-
expressing Tosfos, but that's not really a miracle. And so when the Gemara says, "B'nes
Exactly,
haya
but
oimed,"
why do we have to go to miracles?
because that's what the Gemara teaches us, and the Gemara has a pretty good authority to make
Yeah,
assertions.
but it's only a Tana that says Ben Esai Ahmed. So one Tana says Ben Esai Ahmed.
Nachon, and we want to understand what that Tana meant when he says "B'nes haya oimed." What did he mean?
Okay.
I'll tell you. I think I know. You're asking why does the Tana even go there?
Yeah,
Why
do
go
we
there?
have to go
Not
there?
like
Why
Reb
do we
Beryl
have to go
says
to
we're opening
Nisim?
not
A
Reb
can of
Beryl who says
worms,
we're
a can of worms.
a can of worms. But forget that. What compelled? Let's say we like it or we don't like it. What compelled? Your question is what compelled this sage of the Gemara, this opinion, to say it was a miracle? And I'll tell you what compelled him to say it. You're muted yourself.
Yeah,
The-
I'm
the-
sorry.
because a simple reading of Avriyach Hatichon B'tocha Krashim Avriyach Mina Katzeh LaKatzeh, it's an extreme statement. Which the simple reading is that it threaded itself throughout. That is what you're answering is a dochek in the literal reading of the pasuk, but in reality, it makes us feel easier because we'd rather avoid creating unwarranted miracles. So basically, you have two interpretations. One that reads the verse literal, but the reality becomes harder to visualize. And this Tana is comfortable inviting a miracle into the equation. And in general, we know that there were many miracles in the Mishkan, so it's not an utter shock that there might be another miracle involved in the Mishkan. But you are correct. There is generally a sense that we like to minimize. Well, on one hand, we could minimize the number of miracles that were necessary to make this Mishkan work. And so I certainly understand. That's, I believe, the sentiment that you are expressing. But there is a textual reason why you might want to say there was a miracle.
Rabbi.
But hold on. So Rashi says that it was a miracle, but Tosfos takes your perspective. Tosfos says, hold on one second. That's a pretty big miracle. And why do we need to say that? And so if I understood Tosfos correctly, he says, like what you said, it wasn't a miracle, or at least there's another viewpoint that it wasn't a miracle, and they simply thread the brichim, 3 different brichim, one that was thread on the south side, one that was thread on the north side, and one that was thread on the west side. And now it works b'teva, it could work every time. And we didn't need to be somech al hanes. And that is the perspective that Tosfos adds to the table. And that's what other commentaries apparently say. Now, I am not certain, and this is just my amaratz. Actually, hold on, let me look back at Tosfos. Yeah, there's another brisa that says, the doctor that says your perspective. Now, I just wanted to show you here on the Chumash, on this pasuk, V'abriach hatichon, this is 26, chapter 26, pasuk Chav Ches, Koyach 28, V'abriach hatichon betoch hakrashim, the center bar went through all of the krashim, Mavriach min hakatzeh lakatzeh, threaded all the way through, which again, you might say it threaded throughout the entire Mishkan, or doctor, as you said, and Tosfos says, and the Brisa says, maybe it thread, each side had its own beriach. And as you can imagine, the different commentaries on the Chumash organize and collect the different viewpoints. So just a sample here. Commentary the Bechor Shor says, Amur Rabotenu, the Gemara says, Nes b'toch nes. And here, just to see his words. Habriach hatichon hayan atun l'toch hakrashim. It was threaded within the krashim. Shayno kvimet hakrashim, zeh k'neged zeh. Putina belaz machnis an habriach hatichon b'toch hakrashim. Derech hanikavim mikatzeh hakotel likatzeyu. Aval habrichim sheben hazahav v'hakeresh lo hayuruchim alad chatzi hakotel. Basically, another interpretation is that the middle beam was a single beam that threaded across a single side, and the other beams were even smaller than that. So that would defend the reading that makes it sound like mevriach min hakatzeh lekatzeh, but it doesn't mean literally the entire wall. But what I wanted to show you was another commentary, which I think is the Rabbeinu Bechaya, let's see, who brings in an esoteric flavor. I think it's him. So let me just show you this, and then we'll go to the Gemara. And this is what we gain by not rushing to do a daf a day, but we do want to cover some Gemara ground. So here, Rabbi Chatichon, and he summarizes our Gemara. Rashi, Pirush Rashi, Chamisha brichim hayu lekotel. There were 5 brichim, lekotel tzafon, 5 brichim ledarom, 5 lemarav. Each side had 5 beams. Chamisha ilu shlosha hein. He says also that the top and bottom, because let me just show you the picture really fast. I know this could be confusing. I hope I get you the right picture. No. Let me try one more time. Still no. Here. 1, 2, 3. You have the one that's on the exterior on the top, exterior on the bottom, in the middle. So he says each side had 2, not one, it wasn't one single line, it was 2 on the bottom and then 1 in the middle. That would be 5. Right, 4, and then 1 running through the middle. That's what he says now. It ran from
more
more
bars.
I'm sorry?
One yesterday actually had the 5, like they said, it had the 2 outside, it had 2 larger one inside and 1 skinny one down the middle.
Correct. That's exactly what I mean. It's a different picture, but that's essentially the same thing. Tosfos says no, it was actually all 3 sides. So basically he explains how it could be divided 3 beams, each direction had its own Bria Chatichon. Now let's see the esoteric perspective. I just want to show this to you, maybe. Take note. The middle one, the one that ran through the beams. This is Kabbalistic terminology. This represents, because Professor, yesterday you asked in the Sfirot, according to the diagram, was this the right side or the left side or the middle? So he says, and I said this outside, but I just want to show you with the source. This represents the middle line in the Sfirot. That goes through or carries or supports all of the directions. And this represents the shefa that comes from above to below, supporting all of the shivim sarei ma'ala, the 70, how do you call them? Angels that represent all of the nations of the world. Vihi midato shel. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I take that back. Elsewhere it explains it. Here he says no. He has 70. It feeds 70 supernal angels. Vihi midato shel Yaakov, and this is symbolic of Jacob. Why? Shemikocho yatzu shivim nefesh, because we know that Yaakov had 70 descendants who go down to Mitzrayim. V'imkein hayar ra'oi Yaakov Avinu lohoridu l'Mitzrayim. And therefore, Kabbalistically and esoterically, this association between Yaakov and the 70 and the way that Tiferet, the middle beam, brings energy to the universe is a parallel. Shekin amru b'medrash tanchuma habriya chatichon. And here's the punchline, what I wanted to show you. And indeed, the medrash says that the middle beam was strongly associated with Yaakov Avinu, with Jacob. Why? Habriya chatichon yaradim Yaakov Avinu l'Mitzrayim. Yaakov was carrying around the Briya chatichon from Egypt. He brought it to Egypt. Amar lehev levanav, and he told his sons, Kishetiyu nigalim telu oto yimachem. There's this very important telescoping or long pole, long piece of wood, and take it with you because it's going to have spiritual significance for the Jewish people in the desert. And this is actually an interesting synthesis between something that we hear, but we have a hard time understanding, which is that there's Rashi quotes other midrashim that say that the entire wood for the crushing of the Mishkan was planted by Yaakov and carried around by the Jewish people. And that's a lot of wood. And so this Medrash Tanchuma, which is quoted over here, is a good compromise because it's a single piece of wood, which was probably less involved to carry than all of the wood of the Mishkan. And it also explains why there's this Kabbalistic desire to draw a correlation between the Briya Chatichon and Yaakov Avinu mystically, but its source actually is from the Medrash, which gives Yaakov the credit for fashioning and creating and having that among the Jewish people. And that would also explain why there was something very holy and valuable to the Jewish people about this Briya Chatichon. Take it or leave it, but there you have a little, the rest of the story, as you might say, in the story of the Briya Chatichon. Doctor?
I would say Moshe Rabbeinu, when he used the mateh, that was actually the bariach, and then it extended itself to 70. I'm just,
I understand. I'll explain to you the difference. I know you're trying to say that what you're reading here is as plausible as what you're saying now. But the reality is that
I don't want to make light of it, but where did Yaakov get the bariach from?
He planted trees. What do you mean?
Oh, so he made the bariach out of the trees that he planted.
If he did that, that would have been what he did. Anyways, I hear you.
Rabbi.
If this is gonna hold on, Beryl. If this is gonna be an extension of the medrash of a medrash pylon, I get it. Let's continue. But if it's something else, please go ahead. Beryl, go ahead.
I just wanted to say for Rebbe Nachum, why go there? Why open can of worms? Look at our class.
The Gemara is teaching us that Jews should never be afraid of worms. You can't go fishing if you're afraid of worms. All right. But good news, we're going to go back from the esoteric to the practical and tangible, or more tangible anyways. All right. And back into Exodus 26. Now we're not in 28. Now we're at the very beginning. Let's get the English. Here we're back in the Chumash for a moment. Shmois. Again, we're going to read this in Parshas Truma. Es hamishkan tasa es yiriyos, for the tabernacle make 10 yiriot. Dr. Stamler, what's yiriyah in sheets, right? 10 sheets. But we're hearing strips of cloth as the translation here says. Sheish mashzar, it should be made of linen with the dyes of tcheles, argaman, shani, blue, purple, crimson, as he translates here. And also they should be designed with kruvim aseh choshev tasel. So the Mishkan, what is the Mishkan? What is the tabernacle? What is the tent? So more than the krushim, which we've talked about, it is the materials, the strips of cloth or the sheets of material that covered it with beautiful designs. One more pasuk. Orech hayiriyah hachat. What were the dimensions of these sheets of material? Shmona ve'esrim ba'ama, 28 long. V'rochav arba be'ama hayiriyah hachat. So a single sheet was 28 long by 4 wide. And how many do they make of them? 10. So it's 10 times 4 would be the total length. What's 10 times 4? We're talking about approximately 40 amas. The Gemara is going to break it down much more into this. So it's essentially 48 by 20. Those are the dimensions that we seem to have right now. One more pasuk while we're at it. There should be 5 of these strips should be attached together. And so the strip, that's a total of 40 amas long, is really 20 by 20. That's a simple reading of these psukim. Now we'll go into the Chumash, and I'm saying into the Gemara, and then we'll take a look at the pictures. It helps us to visualize the Gemara. Now I realize that the format should be like this. Okay. We just read a passage that says, "As hamishkan taseh eser yiriyot," construct for the Mishkan 10 sheets of material, 10 curtains, as the Gemara here translates. The dimensions should be 28 long. The Gemara here isn't simply interested in analyzing the psukim. It's going to interplay, and it's going to have significance to the question of the dimensions of the Mishkan and the design of the crushing. Let's take a look. Shadi, let's do some math, says the Gemara. Shadi or chayu lupusya the Mishkan. Align the length of these sheets across the Mishkan. And what do we get? Let's see 1 second. Stretch the length of the panels across the width of the Mishkan. 28. These are, again, 28 long. So Kamahavya, how long was, what was the length of the panels? Esrin Visamni, 28. We know that from the Torah, right? Dal Asa Igara, subtract 10, because that was what the roof, that is the width of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was 10 amot across. So what remains? Pashulu Tesha Lahagisa Vatesha Lahagisa. So you have 28 minus 10 is 18. And what remains now is the materials to drape on each side, 9 on each side. Again, 28 amot, a piece of material that is 28 amos long, runs across the top of the Mishkan and drapes down both sides. So if the Mishkan is 10 amos wide and it's being covered by a sheet of 28 amos, well then you have enough to have 9 amos on each side. It's 9 plus 10 plus 9 is 28. Those are the facts, a simple reading of the Gemara. But now let's think a little more. The Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the beams, the frame came to a point, Megalia Amad Adonim. All that is revealed, all that is exposed is the Adonim, the brackets, the sockets rather of the Mishkan. But according to Rabbi Nechemia, who says that the krushim were actually an amma long on the top, Megalia amma the krushim. You have a whole amma exposed of the krushim. Why? Let's read Rashi. I'm going to start at the middle and then we're going to go back. Rabbi Nechemia, according to Rabbi Nechemia, the Amar Af Milamayla of Yanama, who says that the frame was an additional amma long. There's going to be an additional amma on each side. And so what drapes down is only 8 ammas. Because according to Rabbi Nechemia, the Mishkan was 10 across. And then there was 2 ammas on each side, which was the thickness of the frame. And so all that remains is not 9 amos on each side, 18. All that remains is 16 amos, which is now 8 on each side. Now I want to show you some pictures. I know we're all here able to visualize it, but let's pull this out. Here is an image. You can see my screen, right? Here is an image of the Mishkan. 8 sheets. Each sheet is 4 amos. If you align them 10 by 4, you have it's 40 across. The length of each individual sheet, again, we just read this. I'm just showing you here with the images, 28 amos long. The reason why it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is because as we read in the Torah, they were sewn together 5 and then 5, and they were connected together in the middle, as we'll see soon. Now let's visualize, according to Rabbi Yehuda, these sheets run across the top of the Mishkan, being that the width of the Mishkan is 10 amot. So what happens is 10 across, 9 down, and then all that's exposed is the bottom amma of the bottom amma, which was plugged into the adonim, into the sockets. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says, because they come up to a point, and so therefore the material does not extend over the width of the crushing because it's just an etzba. But according to Rabbi Nechemia, who says that there's an additional amma of the frame itself, well then the material drapes down only 8 ammas and part of the actual beams are exposed. You see, this is Rabbi Nechemia here, where my cursor is currently highlighting. Anyone have any questions? I think the pictures
Rabbi,
yes, Rabbi.
I have a klutz kasha. Why would we in this area where all we're really worried about is malacha on Shabbos go into these minutia about the Mishkan, which deserves a chapter on its own?
The Gemara is not afraid of cans of worms. The Gemara wants us to be comprehensive. And so the Gemara is not afraid if it brings up parenthetically a discussion about carrying, the Gemara is not afraid to choose this place to be the place of the discussion, because I'll explain to you. Here's and we keep on asking similar questions, and these are good questions, and these challenge our way of thinking. But think about the meandering way of our chabura, where on occasion we'll bring up a side issue and we'll choose to spend 10 minutes talking about the history of Tu B'Shvat, because in a conversational setting, that's how it might happen. Well, the Talmud attempts to preserve some of the actual nature of how the conversation unfolded in the Beis Medrash. And so just as in study, it would not be unreasonable to go from talking about the Krushim in the context of carrying, to analyze the dimensions of the wagon, to analyze the dimensions of the Krushim. It only makes sense for the completion of the discussion to now understand how the Krushim actually plugged into the Mishkan. And in order to appreciate the interplay of the sockets, the Adonim, and the Krushim, and the Uriot, this is the right place to have the conversation. Now you're asking, we don't have a Mishkan today, so why is it relevant at all to know? Well, the answer is that the Gemara believes, and Judaism believes, that Torah is not exclusively halacha, or actionable halacha. It is also to understand the Torah. If it's in the Chumash, or if it has bearings in any way to the other parts of Jewish discussion, well, then this is a topic worth having. And your question and my decision to address it, because I think it's a good question, proves our point that it is within the style to have a discussion that is slightly off topic if it allows us to have a general appreciation of the topic.
Actually,
Good answer.
Rabbi, we're not off topic because there's some archaeological discussion of finding the Mishkan somewhere. I don't know, Ethiopia or somewhere.
There's a claim that they found the Mishkan. I think what you're referring to
No,
is that
the Mishkan. Beside whatever.
I think that what you're referring to is that there are certain tribes in, I think, not in Ethiopia, but I think in other area, I think the Lemba, right, or the Lempi or whatever, tribes recreated for themselves a Mishkan. And it is believed that they may have actually been descendants of male Levites or priests or groups that were shipwrecked. And it seems like they constructed for themselves a certain tabernacle stuff, which was also burnt, and then they recreated that. And again, that's what I think you're referring to. But if there's other headlines,
we'll be able to know if it's real. We have the measurements. We'll go there. We'll check.
You should take a tape measure. Okay, good, very good point. Anyways, but back to our topic.
A different question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to understand. So I just want to understand again. I want to go over the Adanim.
Okay,
So,
no, do me a favor. The Gemara is gonna discuss the Adanim in a few lines.
No
So
problem.
if we don't address it, we even have images of the Adanim.
I just want to figure it out in my mind. That's all.
Here, so let's do this fast. Let's take a picture really fast. The Gemara is absolutely going to discuss what you're saying, so that's why. But here, if you want to visualize, here they give us the dimensions. The Gemara gives us the dimensions, and here they draw out. This is essentially the bottom of the keresh. Has these two protruding sockets. I think that's the right word. Not sockets. What do you call the plug? Whatever plugs. And then here is a picture of the Adanim, which actually plugged, which received the crush.
So the Eden was one Amma,
We'll see soon. I don't want to, but let's see soon the dimensions of the.
and they were individually placed to form a base, and
We'll see that.
then the Kashim put on top of that, or
So basically, here what you're seeing is the material that was the covering of the Mishkan laid over the Kurashim, which are plugged into these sockets.
Correct.
And actually,
So
if you look,
So for each keresh, there was an individual Eden.
seems so, yeah. And if you look carefully under the material, you can actually also see.
No.
Reading from the best architect in the whole world.
It would
Hold
make
on.
more
You can
sense.
also see the external brichim that are running on the outside. What you are unable to see, of course, is the internal briach hatichon, which was running from the inside of the crushing, making sure that they
I
were
don't know,
flush.
just from a structural point of view, wouldn't it make more sense to make the Adanim longer instead of just for each keresh?
But we'll see
Because,
soon how we might see soon how the Adanim were locked together.
okay,
Again, the reason why we're starting from the crushim is because that's how the conversation flowed. It started off with the crush. You just muted yourself. It's talking about the crushim on the wagon, and then from there we were
Top
like
to
basically,
bottom.
yeah. All right. So back to the Gemara again. Now that we saw the pictures, Rabbi Yehuda Megalia Amad Adonim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the length of the materials warranted, or by definition meant that there was what was exposed, what wasn't covered by the material was 1 amma, and that was the amma of the Adonim. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates the Adonim, the sockets. According to Rabbi Nechemia, there was 2 ammas exposed because it only came down 8 amos, 1 amma of the keresh and 1 amma of the sockets. Now let's just take a look at the Rashi that I skipped, who goes at length. Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Lamala, who not just a moment ago told us, Kolin Oigan shall crush him the crushim, the beams of the Mishkan came up to a point. So they don't take up space of the material of the sheets of the Mishkan. And when the covering, the sheets of material are spread across the Mishkan, it drapes downwards on this northern side, 9 amas, and 10 amas, the crushim, and then the 9 amas of exposed crushim are covered. But the 1 amma that is of the socket, that's revealed. Here, so doctor, here is your answer. The Adonim were 1 amma tall, and they were hollow. And the beams were etched out on the bottom side. It was a width of an amma, but a length of 1 amma. And basically, well, we'll see the Gemara. Here he's getting into the intricacies of the design of the crushim, which we'll see soon. Anyways, he's explaining how they plug in, but that's coming from the Gemara. The point is, however, that all that remains is as we portrayed here in the picture, an am on each side. But according to Rabbi Nechemia, it came 8 amas down, which means there was 2 amas exposed. There we go. So now continue. Shadi Pusayu. Now let's talk about the width. We talked about 28 amas. That was the length. But now let's talk about the width of each individual sheet, which equals 40. Leorke the Mishkan, and the 40 amos are spread across the length of the Mishkan. Kamihavya. So how much material do we have to deal with? 40. Dal Talson Igra. Now subtract 30, which are spread across the roof. Pashalahu Eser, and what remains now are 10 amos. Rabbi Yehuda Mechasya Amad Adonim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it drops down 10 amos and it covers perfectly the Mishkan all the way to the bottom, including the Adonim. The sockets are not exposed. Rabbi Nechemia Megalia Ama the Adonim. But according to Rabbi Nechemia, we still have exposed 1 amma, which is of the Adonim. Let's take a look at the pictures once again. Here we have, here. So just to note, remember the sheets where we said 28 across and 40 this way. So until now, we've been talking about the width. Now we're talking about the length. And the length is beautifully portrayed with this red line. And so here you have 30 amas across, 10 amas down. If the crushim were thick, or I should say if the crushim weren't thick, well then 10 amas is enough to drape down to the floor. If the crushim were thick, so then it's actually 31 amas across, as it says here, because there's the added amma of the width of the Mishkan, and now there's only 9 amas. And so no matter how you slice it, the western side, the material came down a little bit longer than on the north and south side. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they came all the way down to the ground. According to Rabbi Nechemia, it was elevated by 1 amma. And there you have it. This is the Urios of the Mishkan. Now, all would be fine and dandy and simple and straightforward if there was only 1 layer of material covering the Mishkan. But as we may know, or as we'll soon see, there was actually a second layer of material. The second layer of material, we're going to now discuss in the Gemara, but I just want to show you really fast a sneak peek. The second layer of material came down further than the first layer of material because it was longer. And so that's what we're going to discuss now. And it either covered all the way to the ground on the long sides, on the south and north side, and even extended a bit over onto the ground, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or according to Rabbi Nechemia, it extended almost to the bottom, exposing only one amma of the Adonim, and then on the western side, came all the way down with a bonus. So again, don't be confused. We haven't read it yet in the Gemara, but I just want to show you that we're now going to discuss a second layer of material. Now let's visit the second coating, the second layer of material that covers the Mishkan. It says in the Torah further, V'asisa yiriyos izim. We're in the Torah now. Exodus 26:7. V'asisa yiriyos izim la'ayel al Mishkan. Make a goat hair covering for the Mishkan. Eshtei esra yiriyos, not 10 sheets, but 12 sheets. Tasa isam. So there was an additional 2 sheets, right? Because the first we had 5 and 5. Now we have 6 and 6. And their dimensions are a little longer. The length of each cloth is 30 amos, not 28, but 30. And the width is 4. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said 12, but it's 11. Eshtei esra, I'm sorry. I misspoke. So it's 11 sheets, not 10 sheets. And they are 30 amos, not 28 amos. I just take a look at the picture again, and then we'll go into the Gemara. So you have 11 times 4, because each of the 11 were 4 amos wide, and that's 44 amos, and their length was 30 amos. So we have wider dimensions than our previous, the lower layer of material. Here's the Gemara. Now you're going to make a goat hair covering for the oil, for the Mishkan. They are now 30 amos long. Now let's do the Gemara. Now does the math with us. Shadi or chayu lepusya the Mishkan. Align the length of the sheets across the width of the Mishkan. Kamahava. What is the width of the Mishkan? If you wanted to walk across the Mishkan, I'm sorry. What is the length of the materials? Tlusin 30 amos. Dal esra le'igra. So you have 10 because the width of the Mishkan is 10. Pashulu esra lahai gisa the esra lahai gisa, and now what remains is 10 on each side, 10 across and 10 on each side. Rabbi Yehuda mechasya amad adanim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you take the 30 amos of the length of the sheets of material and you run them across the width of the Mishkan, the roof itself is 10 amos, and you have 20 because it's 30, so subtract 10, you have 20, 10 for each side. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, mechasya amad adanim, now the material runs all the way to the ground, as portrayed right over here. The adanim are unexposed. However, as we're going to see in a moment, Rabbi Nechemia still has a problem. If it's a 30 amma sheet, 10 across, and then 2 for 1 on each side, and then all you have is 9 on each side, leaving the adanim yet exposed. That's what the Gemara is going to tell us now. Rabbi Yehuda mechasya amad adanim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even the sockets on the ground are covered. Rabbi Nechemia megalya amad adanim. However, Rabbi Nechemia remains with the exposed adanim. That is the math of the length, or I'm sorry, the width of the Mishkan, the length of those sheets which are stitched together. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is there any advantage to have it longer besides covering completely, but going all the way to the ground? What's
aesthetics? I imagine. But at this point, I don't think the Gemara is asserting that there is an advantage per se. I think the Gemara is simply noting that a discussion about this, the design of the Krushim, which came up for a very different issue, has strong bearings on how the Mishkan actually looked. And so I think the Gemara here is simply working through what the practical difference would be between how you design the Krushim. So, aesthetics are important, but every aesthetic decision has bearings on other aspects of the project. And so here the Gemara is literally going through the Psukim, imagining how it would all work out based on your interpretation on the design of the Krushim. It's an interesting exercise that the Gemara is doing for us, helping us really, visualize the ramifications of a machlokes in what is probably, I don't want to say unexpected, but not necessarily on our radar, but it's on the Gemara's radar, and the Gemara is doing the work for us.
Aside from the forget the aesthetics, but what about the practical? Why do we need access, according to Rav Yehuda, even a larger access in Rav Nechemia on the west side? Why is that necessary? I mean, practically. I mean, it's shiriotizim. It's not a commodity that's easy, to get, and it adds a lot of work and a lot of material.
So, I mean, when it comes to the Mishkan, the answer is always going to be that this was an instruction from Hashem to Moshe and then Moshe to the people. So the why is secondary, because the why is not, it should be different. The why is, was there a design value? The other thing to remember is that when we study the Mishkan, the dimensions had multiple meanings. So it had the aesthetic contribution, but there were also significance in the length and the measure and the numbers. And so the conversation or the analysis is happening from many different angles. And right now the Gemara is not, the Gemara is not challenging that according to Rav Yehuda or Rav Nechemia, there's something wrong. It's, I believe it's more just trying to figure it out. But it would be interesting afterwards to explore what would be the value of material extending. I just do want to add one other thing. If you're trying to peg down a tent and the material doesn't come all the way to the ground, that could be an inconvenience that should be considered. So the question is going to be, how were these materials anchored to the ground or to the walls? That's a question that we should consider soon. Reb Beryl?
Menachem reminds me of a tremendous word that I heard from the Chafetz Chaim, because when they asked to build the Mishkan, they asked for Chochmei Lev. And the Chafetz Chaim asked, you would usually ask for people Chochmei Rosh, but Chochmei Rosh would stop and figure, let's wait, we're in the desert. He says, Chochmei Lev, gezucht and getun.
A nice word, I like that. Shkaya for sharing that.
Rabbi, is there any consideration that the longer material, when they're moving the Mishkan, you have these wheels? Couldn't it be problematic if you have this hangover piece of material?
Well, the Mishkan, that's an interesting point. I just want to point out the Mishkan was not transported whole. It was disassembled, and so the material was folded up and then carried and transported safely. So I don't think that had an immediate bearing, but it is good to know that there's a dish. If there's a dish, oh, I'm sorry, doctor. And even more than that, I should just add, no one is arguing about the actual dimensions of the material. The question is how the material worked practically.
Draped,
how it draped, how did it work, how did it come? And again, sometimes we read a pasuk in the Torah, and we kind of translate the words, but we don't fully visualize it. And the Gemara is teaching us that when you study something, it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, draw it on paper, figure it out. Okay, how's this gonna work? There's engineering issues. And so I think it's an interesting limud of the Gemara, how the Gemara expects us to consider a pasuk. Again, having the pictures drawn for us is a big advantage in that we can avoid some of the work, but there also is something valuable to sitting down with a pen and paper and doing the math and saying, does this work and how does it work? And a minor comment on a diuk and a pasuk about the Krushim can actually have a big influence on how it happens practically. And I should point out that I believe Rashi in the Chumash also discusses how this machlokes, again, I don't remember exactly where, but I believe it comes into Rashi as well when he's portraying, because Rashi takes the effort to describe the Mishkan for us, and Rashi, I believe, does take into account these different shitot on how the Mishkan worked.
But Rabbi, this was done by the greatest architect in the world. It was done
Hashem?
by the best designer in the world. How could anything go wrong?
It's not wrong. Who said anything is wrong?
No,
This
it's
is-
perfect. I mean, there's no question about it.
It's not
Everything is
wrong.
perfect.
There is precision. The question that we have is, what was the precision? Was there an aesthetic value? Was there an esoteric value? Was it meant to ask? Were the kids supposed to ask questions? So it's good for us to ask what was the point, but it's certainly clear that it was precise and with intention. The Gemara now says, Tanya Nami
The question really, the Gemara the tackles is not a question necessarily only of what is the point. It's how exactly was it done. We have the dimensions, but we are just trying to figure out exactly, was it coming to a point where there square or rectangular?
Right.
That's what we're trying to do here.
And there's another issue that we also need to consider, which is what happened with the corner. The corners have extra material that has to be handled as well, right? All right, the Gemara is going to discuss that. Indeed, there is a brisa that considers the practical distinction or the practical way that the length would change depending on if you accept Reb Yehuda or Nechemia. Tanya Nami Hachi. The Torah continues and it describes the cubit on one side and the cubit on the other side of what remains of the length of the curtain shall hang over the side of the Mishkan on this side and on that side to cover it. Here. The Torah itself considers that there is additional material. As for the overlapping excess of the cloth of the tent, the extra half cloth shall overlap the back of the tabernacle, while the extra cubit at either end of each length of the tent shall hang down to the bottom of the two sides of the Mishkan and cover it. And so now the Torah is going to say, the cubit on one side and the cubit on the other side, on the length of the curtain shall hang on this side of the Mishkan, on this side and on that side. What does it mean? What is it doing? Yehuda says the additional length of the second layer of material over the first covers the exposed amma of the Adonim. And Rabbi Nechemia says, no, the Adonim remain exposed, but it covers the amma shall crush him. Let's take a look at the picture one more time just to see what he's saying. Compare, I'm sorry if you're getting dizzy here. Everybody agrees, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia agree there is something exposed. The question is, what is exposed? Rabbi Yehuda says that the Adonim were exposed on the lower layer of material, and that is taken care of with the outer layer of material, the Urias Izim. And according to Rabbi Nechemia too, there is an added amma which covers more than the lower layer. The question is, what is it covering? Down to the ground? Does it cover the Adonim or just the exposed crushing? And so the pasuk which says that the added amma covers that which was exposed, the question is, what is that which was exposed? And Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia each state their opinion. And this is again a brisa explicitly spelling out that which we mentioned in passing. Okay. Shadi Pusay Lorche de Mishkan. Now let's talk about the length, the width of the material, and the length of the Mishkan. We said that they were Kamahavya, it's 11 times 4. So we're talking about Arba'in ve'Arba'i, 44 amis of length of material. Dal Telasin le'igra, subtract the 30 amot, which is the length of the actual roofing of the Mishkan, and the Mishkan itself, by the way. So what remains is Pashaluhu, our base ray. We have 14 left. 30 minus 44 is, or I should say 44 minus 30 is 14. So there are 14 amot of material that remain. Dal tarte lechafla. 2 are there, Rashi, Shehoisa noita roichev chatzi yiriyah al ruach mizrachis shaloi hayushim krashim shu pesach lamishkan ve'enshim al mesach parish k'mayvila and the. So to drape down. Let's see Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation for the doubling. Because it says you shall double the sixth curtain over the front of the tent, 12 remain. What is the doubling in the picture? Let's take a look. Here, I believe this is what it means. 2 amas here that drape downwards on the open end of the Mishkan. I believe that's what we're talking about. So now all that's left is 12 amos. Dal tarte lechafla d'chsiv. Now you have a chafaltas yirei shishim el mulpnei oil ma'id. So you have a folding of the 2 amas to the open side of the tent. Pashulu tarte sari, and what remains now is 12. 12 amas of material they need to be accounted for. Bish Rabbi Yehuda. Now let's talk about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says the walls had no thickness on the top. Hainu d'chsiv chatzi hayiriyah hayidefes tisrach. That half of the amma that remains shall hang. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz here. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who maintains that the beams narrow to a finger breadth, therefore the top of the beam didn't take away any of the width of the curtain, which enabled the curtain to cover the entire wall of the Mishkan, with part of the curtain on the ground. That's why it says, for the overhanging part, it shall hang over the back of the Mishkan. But we'll look at the picture soon in a moment. According to Rabbi Nechemia, my tisrach, what's remaining? It's not remaining. It seems like there's 2 extra amas, but according to Rabbi Nechemia, there's only 1. So tisrach mechaver. All we mean is it'll hang more. In his opinion, this curtain is 2 cubits longer than the other curtains covering the tabernacle. This needs a little more analysis, but we're 11 o'clock already. So let's do this fast. Tomorrow, Bli Neder will pick up and we'll review this last part. Tana debate Rabbi Shmuel, just a closing point over here, and then we're gonna have to revisit this last discussion. Lama Mishkan Doima. Why is there this extra length? Because the Mishkan represents, similar to Liisha, Shemahaleches Bishuk, Vishipoleha Mehalchin Achareha. We could imagine that the access material that drapes down is like a woman in the marketplace with her skirt billowing, following after her. Today, I don't think this really exists, but maybe imagine a kala, a bride, a wedding, how do you call it? A wedding dress, the way you might have that access that's running behind. And I guess this is, well, we need to discuss this more. What's the measure? What's this teaching saying? Is it a commentary? Is it explaining to us the aesthetic beauty of the Mishkan? Is there more to it? My dear friends, I'm sorry to stop almost in the middle of a sentence. With Hashem's help, tomorrow we'll pick up discussing the length of the Mishkan, the width of the materials, and the textual difference between Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Yehuda. And then this last comment, just a fast peek at the pictures, just to show once again, you have 2 amas, everyone agrees dangling over here. The question is, how much is left? Is it 2 amas that extend past the Mishkan itself, or is it 2 amas longer than the lower layer of material? That is essentially Rabbi Nechemia would argue. Again, tomorrow we'll start off by revisiting this and then continuing our journey through the Mishkan. Certainly, admittedly, a very different style Gemara than much of what we're used to, but it's wonderful to add this kind of discussion to our portfolio of Talmud that's in our pocket or in our Talmud portfolio. Thank you all for being here, for joining us through our journey through the Talmud. As you can imagine, by the time we're done studying the whole Talmud, we'll have a lot of different discussions in many different areas of Jewish thoughts, history, design, and who needs to go to college? You come with an engineering degree and an architecture degree and an architecture degree,
Carpentry,
and a geometry degree and carpentry and the foreign languages. So you don't need to. You just come to Gemara and you'll know a little bit of everything. Anyways, have a wonderful day. Yasher koach to all, and hope to see everybody tomorrow. Well, actually, Professor, the one thing I don't know if we have is computers. We'll have that's to be determined. All right, have a wonderful day.
One thing